Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod with Mario Nawfal. We had a nice pod last time we spoke about 2 months ago. Mario is founder at IBC Group, also CEO there, and founder and host at X Town Hall. He's always front page on Twitter. Cool guy, unconventional guy. So we're gonna have fun again today. This podcast is brought to you by my podcasting company. It's called podpar.com. If you want to start and scale your podcast the unconventional way. Mario, welcome to the pod again. Tell us a bit more about yourself and what you've been up to since the new year.
Good to have you, man. So name is Mario. I'm pretty big in crypto, been in business for over a decade, and I host the X Town Hall on X on Twitter, which is the largest show, the largest space on Twitter. So it takes up a lot of my time. Good to see you again, man.
So it's a very cool operation you have there. It's a media company, we could call it that way. How much humans and what is your goal this year in terms of cash, in terms of accomplishment, in terms of who you'll have on in your rooms? Give us a brief overview here.
Sure. So in terms of targets that I have, is that what the question is?
Right. Questions, and also give us an overview of the business, because I guess most people are not familiar with that business model of yours.
Sure. So there's two companies that I have. The first one is Fruity, which is an e-commerce business in the health and wellness industry. I launched that one about 12 years ago now, maybe 11 years ago. Still exists today. I'm not involved in it. I haven't been involved for a few years now. Still exists today in about 20 countries. And it's doing really well. I had a really good year last year. So that's a stable, healthy, boring business, which I love. And then, so I have an ecom background. That's where I started, where I made my money. And then I got into crypto in 2017, launched IBC, which is one of the larger incubators and marketing agencies in the space. Did really well in 2017, did really well in 2020, and doing extremely well this year. Probably our best year this year and last year, our best period. And then I launched the show, X Town Hall. So I used to be really big on Clubhouse. I replicated it on Twitter, and that one kind of got a life of its own. So we've had senators, we've had politicians, we've had a lot of big names. I think the biggest space I did in the last maybe month was the one with Elon and Andrew Tate, Alex Jones, Vivek Ramaswamy, Jason Calacanis jumped in, a few other names I can't remember. So it was one of the biggest spaces that I've done in the past month, but I've done a whole bunch of them. I've covered a lot of breaking news topics, and that's probably what got my name out there unexpectedly. So whenever there's breaking news, we're hosting it. And now we do 3-4 shows a day, 7 days a week, or 5 days a week, maybe a couple of shows on the weekends. And we do everything from AI to crypto to finance to, we're going to start biohacking. We do gaming. And obviously we do news and politics. We do almost a daily space on news and politics. But the most important thing is whenever there's breaking news, we're there to cover it in an unbiased and objective way. And we became the place that people go to for news instead of going to CNN, instead of going to Fox News.
Very impressive. And how does one monetize all of that?
Monetizing through boring ways like sponsorships either doesn't work or is just peanuts in terms of money making. You have to build a business in the background. So luckily we have a business in the background. We don't monetize the news and politics show. We don't directly monetize that. You can even say we don't indirectly monetize it. We monetize the other shows, the gaming, the AI, the crypto, because we've got the incubator, the tech incubator in the background. So we get a lot of deal flow from it. So I think anyone that is building a media and that's looking to monetize from the media itself, it's just not the smartest way to monetize. Look at Logan Paul, for example, good example that everyone knows. The majority of his money is from his drink. That's how he monetized it. Mr. Beast, his restaurant, Mr. Beast Burger, whatever it's called. So you could still monetize from ad spots. If you look at the top names, the Joe Rogans, the Lex Friedmans, you can still make money from sponsorships. But the real money is building a business in the background. All the richest people in the world didn't make their money from media.
Right. And in the case of your AI show, for example, do the sponsors find you online? Do they just ask you, hey, look, can I sponsor that show? Is it $1,000, $10,000 per show? Like, how does that go?
So they find us, they reach out to us. We also talk about it, but we focus on the incubation. So most of our projects come in and they get their they work with our incubator. They give us shares or tokens depending on what project it is, and they come on our show as well. So we try not to have people just coming on the show for the sake of the show. We try to have people become clients so they can get on the show. So again, you can see all the focus is on the incubation and the business side of the company.
Then when you get these big names on the shows, how do you prepare for them? How do you like brainstorm a list of questions with your team? And how do you make sure that you're in an optimal state when you interview them?
Very rare that I have to prepare. Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, was probably the highest profile interview I did where I prepped for. But others, they just come on and we have a chat, whether it's Vivek Ramaswamy or Elon has been on for a bunch of times, or any other senator and stuff. They're coming to discuss a topic and we have a panel with us. So it's not just me running it. It's not like a one-on-one interview like this is. The panel of different speakers and they all interview. Well, they also sit there chatting with our special guests.
How do you choose your panel, your wingman? Because yeah, you want to choose the right people. If you're like, oh shit, man, here he goes again, and ask a crappy question. Like, how do you choose your team?
Yeah, I haven't done a great job at this. I think just listening to people that have done it already, training them, and we have a team in the background, like a producer in the background that's always giving them feedback. But the most important thing that I look for is someone that's objective and unbiased, at least for the news side. So our whole brand, our whole reputation is not being biased, because obviously mainstream media is all biased one side or another in some way. So we try not to be biased, and that the host has to either be unbiased, which is almost impossible to find, or at least have the ability to put their biases aside. But I've had a few bad choices when it comes to hosts, but in general, I think we've done well.
I mean, you've had Elon and a bunch of prominent folks on the pod. Who do you model nowadays?
So who do I consider a model? I, I learn from a lot of people. I think I get to learn from everybody, even people I disagree with. For example, the space with Elon, Tate, um, Jason Calacanis, and Alex Jones. I disagree profusely with a lot of what Alex Jones says and some of what Andrew Tate says. And I agree with a lot of what Jason Calacanis says and Elon says. But I learned from all four of them. There's a lot of interesting things I learned, even from Alex Jones, who we disagree on most things, and definitely from Andrew Tate. And obviously, there's always things to learn from Jason Calacanis, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Jason and Elon.
I mean, Jason, he's kind of Elon's servant, you know, like if you study him and his reactions, always supporting Elon, you know, I think he has the Eero syndrome or something. What was interesting was listening to Alex Jones and Andrew Tate, which are not yes men's usually, but if you study psychology, it was kind of interesting to listen to that conversation. I mean, they were on Elon's platform, right? And Tate is like biased not to get banned because he's been banned pretty much everywhere and he sees Twitter as a money source. So what was your psychological analysis of that conversation?
I think it was a very frank conversation. I think it's the best way to put it. Like a lot of them didn't feel like they're in an interview. They felt like they're on a phone call. And Alex really wanted the opportunity to speak to Elon, so he really appreciated it. Elon had a certain perception of Alex, and they kind of went back and forth and discussed it, and they didn't agree, but at least they managed to discuss it together. But it was a very open conversation. Like I think you don't get such conversations anywhere else. Not only having those people on stage all at the same time, but having the conversation that we're having, the openness and the rawness of it is something you don't see anywhere else. So we have a lot of speakers that call the show a call. It's like, hey, I'm jumping on this call or I'm jumping off this call, but that's our show because it's just audio only and they can jump in and out. It's like they click a button, they get up because I accept their request and they can just jump off. And we've had, you're talking about Elon, for example. Elon's been on once and he was preparing for a board meeting with Tesla and he's like dressing up. You can hear him zip up his pants and stuff. And he's on the show. That was another episode. Or Vivek Ramaswamy went to the bathroom and forgot his mic unmuted and he's sitting there peeing in the bathroom. That's something I can't do while talking to you right now. And that makes it more like a phone call, makes it more real, more private.
So what is the right framework to have a conversation with someone you disagree with nowadays? And what do you have to say of those calls between vs like the political or politician debates that we see during elections nowadays?
Two things. Number one, ask questions. Number two, listen. That's it. Easier said than done. But asking questions and listening allows you to learn, allows you to open your mind. And these have been some of the most interesting conversations I've had, whether it's about the Ukraine-Russia war, what if it's about the China-US tensions, or obviously the war in Gaza. I've learned the most by listening to the people I disagree with.
The election process nowadays, it feels like a puppet show, you know, and there's these politicians going at each other's throats for the entertainment of the crowds. What would you change to that process, and how would you make the electoral process better, specifically in the US?
I can't talk about how I'd make the electoral process better. I'm not involved in it in any way. Don't understand really how it works. I think that from a holistic approach, something I've said when it comes to censorship is decentralization. You have to decentralize power. And that's what democracy is all about. So the more influence politicians have, or even worse, the more influence or power unelected officials have, the worse it's going to be. Because as soon as you centralize power within a bunch of humans, human imperfection kicks in. And that includes greed, that includes, which leads to corruption, and that includes biases, that includes emotions that shouldn't be there when making important decisions, anecdotal emotions. So I think as the more the US heads to decentralizing different aspects of our society and our system, the better it is. The more it centralizes and gets close to the countries like China, the more concerning it will be. And while, for example, China's going well right now, I worry when power is centralized that what happens when new leaders take over? What happens is if the next when Xi Jinping dies, what happens if the next one is not as emotionally stable, for example, or has the wrong ambitions? I think centralized power we've seen throughout history just does not work that well. So it's got to be more decentralized. It's got to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of tyrants would argue that they brought stability, and US has even sponsored tyrant regimes, especially in South America. But yeah, human rights activists would certainly argue the contrary. Where does freedom of speech end? You know, when people start saying falsehoods about you and probably ruining your livelihood, um, is it the right moment where the law needs to intervene and you need to sue them for defamation, or should it be like a free for all pretty much all the time?
All right, so on the first point about the US sponsoring tyranny and stuff, obviously, there's a lot of similar examples. And on the one of tyranny working, generally speaking, throughout history, we look at genocides and stuff. It's centralizing power. You don't want one person making all the decisions. You want a group of people that hold each other accountable. So you don't have the one party risk or the one man risk. So let's go to the second point about freedom of speech. Obviously, I'm pro freedom of speech and anti-censorship. I've been very vocal about it. That's what X stands for. That's what Elon's fighting for. So I'm fighting for that. But I also understand there is downsides to it. I've been victim to the downsides of it. You know, I was attacked heavily after the Russian mutiny space, and I was defamed very heavily. But there's a legal system there for a reason. That's why I love countries like the US, Western Europe, Australia, you know, advanced countries, advanced economies, because there is a legal system you could use when someone does you wrong. And that legal system is what protected me. You know, I was able to take legal action against anyone that was breaking the law. Defamation is breaking the law. But it's a bit tough. It's tough because it's hard to prove defamation. That's number one. Number two, like for me, it wasn't tough because it was just too clear and the financial damage was very evident. But for others that don't have that benefit, it's very tough, number one, to prove defamation. Number two, to prove damages as well. And number three, to have the money to pursue that legally. So then your question will be like, cool. So is freedom of speech okay? Is it okay to be able to fully cancel someone just because you don't agree with them, just because they don't have the money to sue you? And that's where you get into murky territory. Because if you say, no, it's not okay, then all right. The decisions need to be made, but then you need to be able to prevent those things from happening. Okay, who prevents them? Well, we'll put a group that censors content. Right now, you're centralizing power of censorship or free speech within a group. And what if that gets corrupted? We saw what happened with Twitter files a couple of years ago. So before Elon, Twitter started censoring based on their own biases. And then corruption kicks in. People were getting paid to ban accounts. So as soon as you start centralizing power, you go back to the same problems. You got two evils. One is freedom of speech that leads to things like defamation, misinformation, and disinformation, and full or censorship, centralized censorship, which leads to human imperfections, corruption, etc. So the balance is somewhere in the middle, where, like, I think community notes is a good example. Decentralizing censorship. Community notes on Twitter is the best example of that.
I'm definitely pro freedom of speech. I was defamed too. I mean, any successful entrepreneur have been defamed at some point or the other. And sometimes it's, yeah, more evil. It's like, yo, let's group up and let's make sure that this kid doesn't have business again. It's angry people, it's human emotions in the end. But what I'm really against for nowadays is the old fortunes, I call them, and these folks at the top of society, they seem to thrive off secrecy. They seem to their little moat is secrecy, you know. While I think that new blood is more Silicon Valley like and is open source, they make it at the top, but they share their whole recipe there. So how do you make sure on your end to share a trail of knowledge and inspiration for the next gens?
Well, I think we through our spaces, we have a lot of people that you'd consider part of the group that wants secrecy. They're influential, they're powerful, but they don't want to talk about it. We did a World Economic Forum space yesterday. We had a lot of analysts on. We've had decision makers come on our show. We're talking to presidents and prime ministers right now to come on the space. We got one already confirmed of one of the largest economies in the world that's going to be coming on the show. So I think that having a platform in which they could not only talk about what they believe, but debate and take hard questions is, it's kind of opening up the information, opening up to everyone's eyes to things that they wouldn't know and perspectives they wouldn't usually believe in. And our focus on keeping things balanced means that there's always going to be both sides. They're always going to debate. There's always going to have interesting perspectives, and the listeners are always going to hear part they agree with and the part they disagree with to make up their mind.
Yo, do you have 15 more minutes? Because I just saw that we had 15 more on the agenda.
I have, if it's okay, I do have to jump off in 2 minutes. I don't want to be rude.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, regarding this, one last question, because I'm a technologist and the potential solution to freedom of speech is to, or have some kind of AI to calculate how people would react to some pieces of information, because freedom of speech might go too far when you offend someone or you limit someone or you create cortisol or adrenaline in someone. But then the counter argument to that is that you're not necessarily responsible for these people's reactions, right? So if you would check a system of the future, let's say that we're 25 years in the future, there's Neuralinks, you can calculate the emotional reactions of people when it comes to what you're saying. Is it my responsibility to not offend people because I tend to chase the truth pretty much all the time?
I was having, Charles, that's a good question. I was having that debate with a close friend 3 days ago. It's tricky because I'm also, I hate offending people. Like, I'm very empathetic. So I'm always careful. If you want to be called he, she, it, still, sure, whatever, I don't mind. I call it. If you want to sleep with 10 guys at the same time and you're a guy, and if you want to sleep with someone who's 70 years old or someone who's 20 years old, like, for each his own, as long as you don't cause other people harm. I don't really care. But I also worry about people being too sensitive. Like, there's things I cannot say. Like, there's groups I cannot criticize because immediately they jump on your neck. They try to cancel you and they use certain labels on you to try to bring it down. So then it gets very, very, very tricky because you want to be open. You want to have the ability to speak your mind, but at the same time, you don't want to offend people. And how do you draw the line? More importantly, who draws the line? So it's a tricky balance. I think it's no simple answer to it. I'm always leaning towards free speech, but I'm also cognizant of the harms it could bring. The solution is going to be very tricky. As long as we come up with a solution that doesn't involve having a small group of people decide what can be said, what cannot be said, as long as the solution doesn't have that, I'm fine. But as soon as you get that small group of people, they could be perfect. There could be a group of people that do an incredible job. They censor the content that should be censored. They allow the content that should be allowed. And I applaud them. But what happens when they're replaced and they're replaced again? Eventually, it's going to be a group that's not going to have the right intentions, and that centralization of power is going to backfire. So this is where it gets tricky. You've got social media platforms that were censoring. They were doing a great job at the beginning, but as they got bigger and they have new people coming in, it started getting messier and started getting out of control. Again, Twitter pre-Elon is a good example.
Right. In the case of Twitter Space, maybe some rules and some presets, right? Before they join the conversation, like one, open your mind. Two, this is the model. If you feel offended, like rethink or something like that. Maybe just state some of
No,
these rules.
I don't even state it. They want to be. I don't want them to know if they're offended. I want them to come on and be offended live on stage and decide to leave. Like I want that rawness to it. About them being open-minded, I don't need them open-minded because I want them to be. I don't mind closed-minded people because I have closed-minded people from both sides. So let them clash. Let the audience decide what they like. I've had extremes on the Gaza war because this is very fresh. I've had extreme pro-Israelis that think Palestine should all be part of Israel. And no joke, like should not be any Palestine or Palestinians should be should be moved to the Arab countries. And they've got extremists on the other side that think Israel shouldn't exist and all of it should be called Palestine. And Jews don't belong there. So you got like two extremes, and they come on together and debate live on stage. There's no better content.
And what did you get out of that? What's your stake and your stance on Israel-Gaza last?
Dialogue will fix it. I think there's a small group of people that are not allowing it to happen from both sides, not allowing a two-state solution to happen. But surprisingly, despite this issue having been there for so many decades, it's prior to October 7th, prior to the 1990s, prior to the 1970s, prior to the 1940s, like it's such an old issue that I was surprised as how quickly opposing sides managed to meet in the middle live on stage. And if they were able to do it, I'm sure politicians will be able to do it if there's only dialogue, if they sit on the same table without foreign interference and come to a solution. I genuinely think a solution will be reached. But then again, I could be naive because look how many decades it's been.
All right. Thank you, Mario. Where can people find out more about you online?
I just Google me, guys, and Twitter probably is the best place.